We are days away from the third edition of AEW All In London, and while AEW All In made a pit stop in Texas in 2025, the question now becomes, where does All In go in 2027? Let's talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ringside Cinema. I am Money Mike, and over these last several years, wrestling has become my reason to travel to certain places. I've gone to WrestleMania the past 2 years in Las Vegas. I even went to AEW All In London in 2024, as I've always wanted to go to London, and so I used AEW All In London as an excuse to go to London and see London. I've been to Nashville for SummerSlam, I've been to Detroit for SummerSlam. So, to me, I've become way more interested in where WWE and AEW are holding their major shows. And I'm already planning to go to the Royal Rumble in Phoenix in February whenever they announce the dates. And so one of the things I do want to do is another AEW pay-per-view. And obviously AEW All In is their big stadium show. And if I wanted to do AEW All In next year, what are the location possibilities? Now, Tony Khan has not said that he's picked a location yet, but I have 4 locations I think primarily could be a big draw for All In. 2 in which are in the United States, and one that is in North America, but it's in Canada, and another in Mexico City. So, as we talk about all this here, I do want to bring up the fact that there is still that possibility of a major stadium show in April in the United States for AEW to run a WrestleMania style type of event to counter WrestleMania being in Saudi Arabia next year. So it is quite possible that we do get 2 stadium shows for AEW next year. And I do want to leave a link up here to that video where I did discuss the possibility of an AEW All In or AEW stadium show that would counter WrestleMania. And obviously, AEW All In is in the summertime, and WrestleMania would be in April. Now, I do think that AEW has grown enough to where they could do 2 stadium shows a year. I don't think they should do what the WWE does and have 3 or 4 multiple stadium shows a year. But I do think maybe having 2 stadium shows a year, where one is in the United States, one is maybe in an international location. One could be All In, and then you have another one being another stadium show elsewhere. That is a strong possibility. So as I was thinking about, where could AEW All In be? I did kind of take into consideration, there is a strong possibility, that maybe one of these cities in the United States could be where AEW runs their stadium show that counters WrestleMania. So, obviously, AEW All In Texas was at the Rangers Stadium. So, for me, the first thing I thought of when we're talking about, All In, and I don't know if AEW would be able to get into the NFL stadiums, I think a lot of fans would love to see that, to be able to kind of compete with WWE for these NFL stadiums. I will talk about a little bit about that here in a minute, but it's one of those things where I don't see a lot of these NFL teams jeopardizing their relationship with WWE to say put a AEW show, say in New Orleans. That's where a lot of fans were saying that, hey, AEW should run their stadium show in the United States in New Orleans because of WrestleMania being taken away from New Orleans to go back to Las Vegas. And so I don't know if that would be ever possible. Now, as of the recording of this, I will say they AEW All In ticket sales have gone up. I think they're going to probably be close to 50,000. And realistically, I mean, you could probably get. I mean, it is London, but maybe AEW could give it another year or two, get close to that in a NFL sized stadium. I'm just saying. So I want to take all that into account before we break everything down here. But yeah, I think the big key is going to be, what does AEW do for their major stadium show that counters WrestleMania, if they even do that? That is just speculation or rumor at this point, because they could just run All in the United States, where maybe it's in the summertime and it doesn't counter WrestleMania. Maybe AEW just has a regular pay-per-view, regular standard pay-per-view. So with that said, let's break down the cities here. We're going to start in the United States because I feel like AEW could probably realistically run All In at one of these two locations next year. And one of these is one that actually they might be competing with the WWE for. So let's start with Boston. Okay, so AEW has never run a pay-per-view in Boston ever, which is surprising. Like, there are some cities that have yet to hold a pay-per-view or held a AEW pay-per-view, and Boston is one of them. And now, if you stick around, say All In, All In Texas, which was in July, you might run into some issues maybe in August, but running your very first pay-per-view in Boston, being All In at Fenway Park, would be a pretty historic event to bring the very first pay-per-view first AEW pay-per-view to Boston. That would be huge. I think that would garner a lot of ticket sales, and I think they would do pretty well. And I can't remember the ticket sales for AEW All In Texas, but I think if they ran it at Boston at Fenway, they very, very well could surpass how many tickets they sold for All In Texas. And again, considering Boston has never held a pay-per-view, held a AEW pay-per-view before, it's very possible that maybe Tony Khan makes All In Boston be the very first pay-per-view in Boston, and probably WWE will probably counteract with a show in Boston and bring out John Cena to try to counter AEW Boston or whatever. Now, speaking of WWE, there are rumors that WWE wants to run a stadium show at the home of the Milwaukee Brewers. But also, AEW has also kind of been talked about as a possibility of running a stadium show there. And this could be one of those like neck and neck races where the other are trying to beat each other to run a show there first, right? Could AEW put a show in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium like All In before the WWE could run potentially SummerSlam or Survivor Series? It's very possible. And I think this is one that's going to be very interesting to watch. Just because of the WWE aspect, where it does seem these that they are competing for the very same venue. Now, we've seen the WWE run the baseball stadiums for Survivor Series, so it wouldn't be until November and after the baseball season when there's no like conflict with home games and needing enough time to break everything down, set everything up, that type of deal. Whereas AEW would kind of run that issue in terms of if they were to run it in the summer, July or August, that would be very interesting. I think too, like I said, I think you could even run Boston and Milwaukee as even your US Stadium show that counters WrestleMania in April. So we'll have to see what happens there, but I do think if Tony Khan is going to put All In back in the United States, I do think Milwaukee and Boston should be the top two. Obviously, you have New York, San Francisco, a lot of other baseball stadiums you could use. But again, Boston, because they've never held a pay-per-view there before, I think that would be great. And again, Milwaukee as more of a, hey, we beat you to the punch to host a show here, WWE, that type of thing. But I will say this, though. My top two favorites right now for All In next year are international locations. I think if AEW runs that US Stadium show in April, it's very possible that we're looking at Toronto, Canada, and All In Mexico City, potentially in July and August of next year. Just again, going off of when AEW All In Texas was running July, and obviously the end of August here would be for those locations. So it is interesting to note, I was looking at the Toronto Blue Jays schedule next year, and they have enough of a gap in July to be able to host All In July, around the same time period that All In Texas was held. So it's very interesting that Toronto, the Blue Jays, have a major gap between when they play their home game, because like the schedule shows, like they have they end the home series on July 1st, but they don't play another home game again until July 16th. So theoretically, AEW could run All In Toronto on July 10th. Now, the other thing here, and if, maybe, I don't know how long Cope is going to stay around in AEW. I don't know if he's going to retire after this year. But if Tony Khan booked the Rogers Center to be the host of All In next year, you could convince Adam Copeland, Edge, to stick around another year and have his big retirement be in Toronto at the Rogers Centre, and you think back to when months before he made his WWE return, it was SummerSlam 2019 in Toronto, where we did see him spear Elias. So it would be kind of fitting that he would retire in Toronto, and longtime fans know the story of him being at WrestleMania 6. So it would be very fitting that, if possible, Tony Khan could convince Adam Copeland to stick around for another year and hold a big retirement celebration in Toronto for him. But also, there is something else that's interesting about the Blue Jays schedule. Because I talked about Milwaukee being a hot spot for both AEW and WWE. And I will say this, I will go on record right now, and I think Toronto is either going to get All In or they're getting SummerSlam next year. And I'll say this, here's what I'll say about that, and then I'll talk about Mexico City before we close out this video. But when I looked at the Blue Jays schedule, they also have a gap at the end of July, beginning of August of next year, where they're not playing at home. And I was looking at that, and I'm like, okay, you know what happened with the ticket sales with WWE in Minnesota at the Viking Stadium. If the WWE got cold feet and said, you know what, maybe we should downsize to an MLB stadium, and they wanted to go somewhere like Toronto, again, they were there for SummerSlam in 2019, but if they wanted to go back there but do it at the Rogers Centre, they very well could. And so it's very much possible that WWE and AEW are competing for the same real estate in that regard when it comes to Toronto and Milwaukee. Now, last but not least here, Mexico City, I think to me, if you can't do Toronto, I think Mexico City All In would be absolutely amazing. I know some people have said, they should do Forbidden Door. And honestly, I think maybe I could see Forbidden Door there going to Mexico City first. And obviously right now, Mexico is becoming a hot spot for wrestling lately. With WWE purchasing AAA, you see what's going on with AAA intertwining with the main roster. The whole tournament going on to see who's facing Roman Reigns. And of course, obviously, AEW has their connections with CMLL. They just ran Grand Slam Mexico City, like at the beginning of August. So Mexico is becoming a very, very big hotspot for wrestling as a whole. And if Tony Khan wants to beat WWE to the punch with a major show in Mexico City, All In would be a very, very intriguing and very best option for next year. So I think it's very interesting that we're seeing kind of now the competition between WWE and AEW is heating up more so behind the scenes, where they're now kind of competing for the same cities, the same states, the same countries. And obviously, as we know, next month, they're both going to be in Chicago. Got Worlds Collide in Chicago and All Out in Chicago. So they're competing for the same real estate. And obviously, that is what's best for the wrestling business. That's best for the fans, is having two competing companies going back and forth, competing for the same real estate. And that makes everything better for the fans, for the wrestlers. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you want to see AEW All In 2027 take place? Leave your comments below. And I will be live streaming AEW All In this Sunday. So I will have further details on Friday's video. So go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button today. And again, let me know your thoughts on where you would put AEW All in 2027. I've been your host, Money Mike, and you've been watching Ringside Cinema.